So good afternoon everyone. I'm happy to be here. This is my alma mater. I started my journey from this center and I'm really happy and thankful to my professors, especially Professor Shravan Kumar Acharya, Madam Purva Yadav and others who gave me this opportunity to present my research work in front of you. So I'll be speaking on urban transformation, specifically on Siliguri's context, and I will focus on specifically to the conversion of Chandmoni Tea Garden into a Uttarayan Township. Now, the significant literature on urban transformation basically speaks about conversion of land into real estate. Here is a classical case where a century-old tea garden was converted into a township development in Siliguri. And in my presentation, I will give you some of the findings, nuanced findings about accumulation by dispossession and other processes through which a tea garden were converted into a township.
Now, specific to Siliguri's Chandmoni's context, there are two important things that there. Let me talk about this. One is that traditionally tea garden, workers, although they were lived in tea garden, they have no land rights in the area. Okay, they have no land rights. Specific to Chandmoni's context is that they have another category of land which is a vested land, and they claim that that vested land is theirs. Unlike in other areas of West Bengal where whoever occupied the vested land, they were given pattas, in Chandmoni's case no such actions were taken by the government. So it was kind of diversion, or we can call it a difference that have been taken place. So since the tea garden workers were living in this area for generations, they have one kind of affinity developed over this particular 24 acres of land. However, in 1994, when Siliguri Municipal Corporation's boundary were reconfirmed, so these 24 acres of land were brought under Siliguri Municipal Corporation, this vested land under, and SGDO was the initiator for that. Now these land become a contested land because this land came under the 46 ward of Siliguri Municipal Corporation, but the land was actually under the control of the tea garden workers. In 1992, if we recall about the so-called tea industry's overall prospects in North Bengal, tea industry was suffering through different kind of crises, and one of the immediate effect of this crisis were that the regular employments, posts of the tea garden workers were cut down and they were casualized. In case of Chandmoni, same thing happens during 1980s periods. Some studies are there, only one important study done by Bhadra, which talks about the deplorable condition of the Chandmoni tea gardens workers. There are no housing, there are no sanitation, nothing, and they were living one kind of life which was beyond explanations at that point of time. So what happened at the time of announcement in 1992, when it was said that the tea garden will be converted into a township, the actual number of the permanent workers came down to 243 and there are around 300 temporary workers. Now in 1992, what happened? Chandmoni tea gardens ownership was changed. Previously, some Ray was there. The local Ray, he was one of the tea planters was there from Jalpaiguri. But in 1992, the ownership, changed in the hand of Lakshmi Tea Company, and LTC was a renowned tea company. And the tea garden workers, they thought that since Lakshmi Tea Company is entering into the venture, there is a chances that the misfortune will go and Chandmoni will do better, because even at that point of time, Chandmoni's overall tea production was very good. It was almost around 8 lakh kg tea production per annum, sufficient enough to sustain for the workers as well as their families, and to the chances of recovery of the whatever losses were there were actually was there. We will discuss about that thing. But immediately after the change of ownership of the tea plantation, what happened? Within 3 years, the LTC, they approached the West Bengal state government that we are facing heavy losses, so tea plantation is no more, I mean a profit making kind of an effort. Therefore, it is better that we convert this tea garden and make it a township for prospering Siliguri, the rapidly expanding Siliguri, dense populated Siliguri. It was a good initiative, government thought, and government agreed on that proposal. And because of this proposal, government later on signed a memorandum, signed a MOU so that this can be done. The actual amount of land out of 600 acres of land, government say that 400 acres, almost about 400 acres of land can be converted into township. In the remaining land, the tea plantation must continue. I will go into the legal integrity into that within few minutes. And there will be no job cut, there will be no, whatever displacement will happen, the workers will be properly rehabilitated. Those clauses are there. More than that, Siliguri Jalpaiguri Development Authority supposed to get 20 acres of land from this converted 400 acres of land. This was written there, and the premise of this conversion were 2-3 things. One was that Chandmoni was no longer profitable, Siliguri needs a new township, and through this township proper development was happened. These were the premise that was stated in the signed memorandum of understanding between the West Bengal government and the LTC. Now, tea gardens land, tea gardens labor, everything are mainly regulated by 3 acts. First is Tea Act 1953, Plantation Labor Act 1951, and West Bengal Estate Acquisition Act 1953. So, I just mentioned that the premise under which Chandmoni was converted was that Chandmoni was not a profit making thing, right? Profit making sector. If we look into 1997's MOU, it was signed between West Bengal state government and the owner of the Chandmoni tea garden. So it was a bilateral agreement, and there was no option for intervention of the tea board or the central government. But the Tea Act 1953 says otherwise, that if some tea industry has to be announced sick or non-profitable, that announcement can only be done by tea board and with the Tea Act 1953. So this was something was bypassed in the case of Chandmoni. So according to some previous studies like Biswas and Dasgupta, they said in the case of Chandmoni, 1953's Tea Acts were violated, and as per the 1953's Tea Act, there is a specific clause which says under which condition a tea garden can be said that it is non-productive, and it says if the preceding 3 years out of the 5 years is the overall tea plantation, overall production of a tea state is less than 25%. Then the district average, then we can say it is no longer, tea plantation is not, enough to sustain the production. And the section 16 also says that if such event happens, then there is a clear-cut directive given to the Tea Board of India that they can give away the registration to someone else, or there is a chances that cooperative society might come run by the tea garden workers to sustain that factory. Anyway, in case of Chandmoni, that thing has not been followed. Now let's look into the table. I tried to look into the conditions of the logic, the first premise that Chandmoni was not profitable. But the calculation which are there in red and the green is suggests that per hectare labor productivity, per hectare yield in terms of per kg per hectare was much higher than all of the Tarai, all of the North Bengal and all of the Darjeeling district, if we took all the figures. So overall tea production of Chandmoni, which was around 8 lakh per annum, was sufficient enough so that we can retain these tea states. Next thing is that the argument that was given by the so-called LTC that it was suffering from financial losses. But if we look into this figure in the 1992 when they acquired the tea plantation, and in 1995 when they said that it is not profitable, if we look into these years, the prices of the tea was actually rising. Okay, these prices of the tea was actually rising. So in the 1980s, where the tea industry was facing a crisis, in 1990 situation was actually reversing. So there are certain chances that Chandmoni could overcome its financial losses if anything was there. Now look into the other aspects of the MoU. As per the MoU, the valuation of the 406 acres of land was was valued by the so-called the valuation board 75 crores. But the West Bengal government gave away that land only on 13.9 crores. So government was ready to make losses of 61 crores to convert the tea estates. Just try to understand. At that time, Chandmoni's owner was claiming that his losses were 2 crores almost. And now government is ready to give away the land through having a loss of 61 crores. So you can understand the dynamics of conversion. Now, one newspaper report that Nambudri talks about this situation, how the cabinet, what are the cabinet's process, how these things has happened. Although cabinet was not ready to do that, but the finance department took this initiative so that this project can come. Now let's talk about these things. I already mentioned what was the number of tea garden laborers there and their approximate numbers of families which were dependent on that. Now in 1998, after this declaration, after the signing the MoU, the tea garden workers were served a notice that they have to go into Subol Vita, and Subol Vita will be a new tea garden where they will be rehabilitated. Just try to understand. Under the Plantation Act, Chandmoni was a registered tea garden which was having a land to continue tea plantation, but Subol Vita was a distance place. It was around 30 kilometers away from the main tea garden, and there, as per the Plantation Act, the proper housing, proper sanitation, nothing was built. So it was clearly a violation of the Plantation Act and as well as the Tea Act, which basically safeguards the tea estates as well as the rights and the interest of the tea workers. Now immediately after the announcement of this conversion of the tea garden, what happened in Chandmoni, which was dominated by CITU, what happened? The tea garden workers, they started disbanding CITU because CITU leaders, the so-called CITU leaders were basically the non-tribal background. They are mainly the Bengali speaking leaders, and they were not interested, or they are not even tried to listen that what our workers are demanding for. Because of this pretext, what happened, the CITU, the Chandmoni CITU unit was closed within a month or within or few days after this announcement. And in the immediately after the, they left the CITU, INTUC, that is Indian National Trade Union Congress, they entered to fill this vacuum of the leadership. But some of the workers who later formed the Mazdoor Union, after looking into the kind of action that both CITU and INTUC both have done, they mentioned this fact that the INTUC leader actually were one of the negotiators for making this deal, and they actually forced, or rather persuaded 101 tea garden workers so that they can go to Subol Vita. So out of 243 workers, now 101 workers, now they shifted into Subolbita. That means the remaining workers now, they actually were agitating, and these agitating workers later form Mazdoor Morcha. Mazdoor Morcha means workmen's forum, and they are basically only, they are the only representation over that, they are the workers of the Chandmoni Tea Garden. Later on, some 11 civil society organizations also joined into that, and they formed what is called Chandmoni Tea Estates Anti-Eviction Joint Action Committee. And these two front, Mazdoor Morcha and this front, they together continued this resistance for nearly 6 years until in 2002, these tea gardens were converted into a township. Now in 2003, so in 2002, what happened? Finally, when 2002 came, the entire 600 acres of tea garden were basically tea plants were uprooted. Although it was said that only 400 acres of tea garden will be cleared out of 600 acres. So basically, the authority as well as the government, they were basically want to make the tea garden workers to abide by whatever the terms of negotiation they can put on them. Now in 2003, immediately after this incident, a memorandum of settlement was finally signed, and as per this memorandum of settlement, 122 acres of remaining permanent workers, they were forced to take voluntary retirement with a compensation of 2 lakh. Although authority withheld the gratuity benefits and other benefits, it was said that they were given land and the patta, but such thing hasn't happened for the long time, and they said that only 2.5 acres of land will be given. Now it only speak about the permanent workers. We should not forget the remaining 300 temporary workers and their families. More than that, in the tea estates, there are many people who are aged and they are dependent on the tea gardens, and they live through generation into that. That temporary workers and that old age workers were not covered under the so-called memorandum of settlements. Now for that, what tricks government apply, I will come back to that later in the later part. Now look into this so-called, the Uttarayan Township's urban planning and development. As per this, what happened? It says that where the housing will develop, where the shopping mall will be developed and all. But it specifically talks about that which are the designated areas where tea plantation must continue. And if we look into the actual area of this tea plantation, we find some other stories. Most of these areas, especially along the National Highway 31, these areas are low-lying areas, and we know that low-lying areas are not suitable for the tea production. But actually they give this land in the name of tea plantation. Now this is something interesting. If you can see, here is a cricket field is there, right? Although this whole area should be under the tea plantation. And this thing has been continued since 2008, when the so-called this township, Uttarayan Township, came into existence. So it's a clear violation of what the HGD approved, the Uttarayan Township plan must continue, and what was the actual scenario. So it is a cricket field. I visited, and this is the same thing. If someone from Siliguri, you can visit this place. Now in 2018, a newspaper report came, that the tea garden owner now want to convert it into a cricket stadium. And when I go to a real estate developer, he says that just look into the success of the IPL. Siliguri have huge cricket fan, huge population base, and if the owner can convert this tea plantation, the land designated for this, tea plantation, it will be a huge thing for him in terms of real estate and property, sector. When I talk about Shukma, the so-called the past tea garden owners, he said, if it happens, we will not surprise. We have seen that how norms has been violated over the years in this area, and we know, if you look into the tea gardens of North Bengal, their gratuity are not being deposited over the years. People are dying over the years in the entire North Bengal belt, so they would not surprise if something happens, that outrightly that land is converted into a cricket stadium or something else. Now this is another picture, that is designated area where the so-called tea sapling should continue, and look at the scenario there. They destroyed, I mean there is nothing actually, the barren grassland is there, and when I asked the so-called security guard there, the security guard was saying me that, sir, isme to kuch din baad hotel ho jayega, the hotel industry will come into this area. So this is how the violation of the sanction plant is happening. When we talk about accumulation by dispossession, we only speak about so-called the regulated dynamics of it, but illegality or illicit development is another aspects of accumulation dispossession we should understand to understand these urban transformations context. Now we'll come to the part 2, when I will talk about, I mean, the Uttarayan Township. Now in 1992, I mean, when the Siliguri Jalpaiguri Development Authority, they talked about Siliguri's future development, they talked about the necessity of a township. And if we look into Siliguri's data, sir has mentioned in the beginning, the Siliguri's overall population is rising like anything. So for that matter, the pretext, one of the pretexts was that Siliguri need a township so that Siliguri's congestion can be diverted. But looking into the actual situation of the overall development, these entire 400 acres of township can only accommodate 8,000 to 10,000 people. So it is very, I mean, very less, it is very insignificant if we talked about Siliguri's overall population's growth concern. But then the question comes, for whom this township has been developed. Now I will come to that part. Now, if we look into the Town and Country Planning Act, West Bengal Town and Country Planning Act and West Bengal's Township Act, it talks about if any township happens under PPP model, it should have LIG section and the MIG section for the poor people. Following this act, in Siliguri's Uttarayan Township, these two things has been done, that LIG has developed and the MIG has developed. But who are actual residents there? Actual residents are not from the poor section or the middle income section. Right now who are residing there are actually from the rich and the affluent class. If you go there, the property prices are escalated like anything. I mean, in 2008 it was 1 lakh. When I visited in 2019 it was 16 lakh, just 1 BHK apartment, and now it will be 25 lakh. Each person is giving a maintenance charge 2 rupees per square feet floor prices. So it is a huge price which poor people cannot afford. So most of the, I mean, first hand owner have already sold their properties, and the property is transferring from second hand to third hand to fourth hand and all. So it's a speculative economy that is developing over here. And second aspect is the rentier capitalism which is evolving. In these two, LIG section and the MIG section, people are giving these properties on the rental basis, which range from 6,000, 7,000 for 1 BHK to 17,000 to 18,000. So look at the range who are actually living into that area. And if you visit this particular place, you will be surprised that although LIG was developed where there was no parking facility, but this area is full of luxury cars there. I haven't placed the photographs, but if you visit this place, you will find these are SUVs or so-called luxury cars and other things. So if we look into the so-called urban theory, there is a theory called urban gentrification. Can you connect urban gentrification and all? So it also shows another kind of gentrification, from the transformation from poor man to rich man, how the property transfer hands in actual situation. So these are the facts which I have talked about. There is another aspect which are there is the luxury bungalows are there, and these are not ordinary bungalows. I mean, first of all, look into the land prices, the speculation of land prices which are there from 2004 to 2024, 2025, from 1 lakh per katha to 70 to 80 lakh per katha in Uttarayan townships. So who can afford this land? The fact of the matter is that only 30% land has been utilized for development of the bungalows. Rest of the land are basically purchased by so-called Siliguri's rich man, the tea garden owners or other business person or people from Sikkim, because Sikkim is one of the highest income state right now. So they are investing into the land. That is the speculation is happening in Siliguri's Uttarayan Township. And how they sell the property? They sell the property on the context that this is the future of Siliguri, and it is an area which have a broad roads, and it is an unparalleled township that has developed in comparison to the rest of the other parts of the country. Next thing is that I talked about bungalows, right? So bungalows are costing around 3 crores to 7-8 crores during 7-8 crores in 2020. Right now the highest prices might be more than 15 crores or 14 crores. I don't know the actual figure of it, because the actual figure might not come while interviewing these people. Now I also studied the personal narratives of the owners of the so-called the bungalows of these tea gardens, and their narratives are very interesting, because most of these people are connected to either so-called big organization, the big business organization, either the Siliguri Tea Auction Center, or either they are associated with Credai, that is, Credai, that is real estate developers agency, or they own 4 or 5 tea gardens like that. They also know Neutia ji. During the interview they are saying that I know Harshavardhan Neutia personally, and we have, the moment this project was actually built by the Neutia, so I have a regular contact with them. So this shows the social class actually for whom this township was developed. So we always talks about whose cities is all about, right? So under neoliberalism, whose cities is all about is in the pretext of the Chandmoni. It shows that it actually goes for the rich people, and the marginalized remain marginalized forever. City Center Mall, in Siliguri the biggest mall is City Center Mall. I look into the footfalls, whatever items are sold, and it shows some surprising things. It shows that footfalls is around 10,000 on a regular days. I'm talking about pre-COVID period. I don't know what is happening there. Now another interesting fact is that if you talked about Siliguri, during the holidays and during the Fridays and Saturdays, crowd increases. Why? Because Bihar is a dry state. Bihar is dry state, nobody can drink there. So in each Friday evening, people flock into the Siliguri, and Siliguri is basically, turned into all, so-called, drink lovers place. So naturally, it shows that remaining in the boundary of Bihar, Siliguri has another kind of, development which is related to liquor consumption. And some of the anchors which are there are actually not even available in Kolkata also. So it shows that what are the customs, what are the items are actually sold there. Why? Primarily because of Sikkim, because Sikkim is the richest, per capita income state right now, and the people of Sikkim can afford these products. So therefore, Siliguri's Uttarayan City Center Mall, what are the products they sold? Many of these products you cannot find even in the so-called City Center Mall of Rajarad or New Town of Kolkata. Now while coming to the last part of my presentation, it related to the reappropriation of labor. So in mid-January 2020, while I was researching on Siliguri, I find that a group of contractual workers were protesting outside the city center mall, the so-called Uttarayan Township's Residential Welfare Society's office. These workers were actually the erstwhile tea garden workers. In 2002, after the fatal incident of workers' killings in the police firing, the Garden Authority uprooted entire 600 acres of land. And in the aftermath of the incident, CPIM and CITU leaders, they faced intense criticism from the opposition political parties and civil society organizations. Consequently, the local leaders soon attempted to intervene the matter before it deteriorating further. And there are comments of CM Buddhadev Bhattacharya regarding incident. So the mechanism they developed was some kind of damage control mechanism, and the immediate damage control mechanism was that to employ 20 permanent workers into city center, in Uttarayan Township as a Safai Karmis. So these people are actually the Safai Karmis. Now the fact of the matter that when I visited in 2020, things got changed, because after the establishment of Uttarayan Township, it was under the control of Lakshmi Township. Now in 2019 and 20, the residential associations were taking the charge of this to look into the matter of governance and everything, service and everything of the city center and the Uttarayan Township. So the new residential welfare society were not willing to employ these people. So at the age of late 50s and early 60s, once again they were under the verge of another kind of joblessness from 2002 to 2020. So it shows another kind of precarious situation for them. A few meters away, I also find a group of the tea garden workers, current generation, that is mostly the youth from age 20s and 40s. And they are basically operating a parking place, and this parking place is illicit parking place. Outside Siliguri's city center mall, adjacent land close to the National Highway 31, these land are basically captured by them, and they are continuing to manage a parking plot in this land. Every day around 2,000 to 3,000 motorbikes are parked there. Each motorbikes are parked on the basis of 10 rupees. So on a regular day they can earn about, if you 2,000 money, 30,000 to 20,000 on a regular day. The overall monthly income is around 6 lakh to 9 lakh in this maintaining these things. So around 60 to 70 people, 70 youths are currently engaged in these things. Rest of the so-called other, tea garden workers and their families now engaged in running the Chandmoni Tea Garden Syndicate. For you, those who don't know what is syndicate about, syndicates are basically low-level cartels for supplying raw building materials and other things in entire Bengal right now. Although it was initially started to, make an arrangement for the land losers. Basically, it started from Rajarhat, but before Rajarhat, it actually started in Chandmoni's case. Though you can see that how this arrangement were made. I spoke with Mr. Mojumdar, one of the leaders who is associated with that Chandmoni Anti-Eviction Joint Committee. He is also associated with CPIML, because this anti-eviction group was supported by 11 organization, NGOs as well as CPIML. So he spoke about that Garden Authority started Katauti. Katauti means wage cut from the wages of the construction workers who were engaged in the project site at 2 rupees each. For building a city center like construction and building a Uttarayan kind of construction, thousands of workers were employed for several years, and those uncounted money were poured into the hands of the selected few workers, and ultimately who started controlling the other workers. That is the origin of the Chandmoni Tea Gardens Syndicate. Ritanjan Das, he spoke about this, how things has been happened in case of Rajarhat and other things. He shows that it was a kind of, if you talk about Partho Chatterjee and other, they talks about political society, right? That is, marginalized people, they negotiate and they find some other kind of arrangement where the workers cannot be engaged, but other kind of arrangements through which the so-called landlords can be given some space to live their livelihood. Now in 2018, although the so-called Shukma, who own with CPM tickets the local panchayat of the Chandmoni, now even after winning the seat, he compelled to quit CPIM and join TMC, because he was saying that मैं क्या करूँगा, if I do not join TMC, that all these syndicate, all this parking, everything will goes. So it shows the political maneuver of the erstwhile Chandmani Tea Gardens who formed this syndicate Raj over there. And they are actually dependent upon police, because if they don't continue that, police will going to, clear these places and all. Now, next is the new workers. It is not that everyone were syndicate members, everyone were the parking, managing the parking places and all. Some of them are also engaged as city centers cleaning staffs or the low paid workers job. Mostly range from 8,000 to 20,000 depending upon the kind of jobs they are employed upon. But interesting fact is that the previous generation of labor, even the 20 erstwhile tea garden workers who were, I have shown that they were agitating in front of Chandmani Tea Garden, in front of the Uttaran Township Owners Association, the deviation is there that now the new generation of the Chandmani Tea Garden workers, they don't have any bargaining power, because working in city center mall requires that there should not be any kind of organization, association, they should be attached to it. So this shows the negotiation of the Chandmani Tea Garden workers. Once they were rebel, they can resist with the so-called neoliberal forces, but once the production unit is no longer existed, fighting with neoliberal forces is difficult. They have to co-optate under the neoliberalism with some kind of these kind of arrangements where they will turn into precarious, because there are instances when few workers, they protested that we have these kind of demands and all. They are actually thrown out of the city center mall. So it clearly shows, my overall presentation shows, one is how land is converted, it talks about the legal pathways, it talks about extra legal pathways, it talks about Jameen capture, it talks about for whom the city was developed, and ultimately I spoke about what happened to the erstwhile tea garden workers, their families, and how they are co-opted into new kind of urban transition in case of Chandmani converted into Uttaran townships. So with this, I am going to end my presentation here.